Well, today is the start of Advent. Can you tell? Could you tell when you came in? Now, I ask not to be totally funny and ironic, but because when we listen to the gospel reading today, I'm not sure if we can tell that it is, in fact, the season of Advent. So a little context to the gospel is needed and helpful today. Jesus is up on the Mount of Olives with a few of his disciples, and he's talking to them about many things, and they ask about the beauty of the temple. They make note of the beauty of the temple. And he tells them that, like many things, temporary things in the world, even the temple will be torn down. All the things in the world that they hold steadfast to, that they find hope in, will all at one time be gone before the Son of Man comes back. And there will too be suffering. And then, in the midst of that, he's preparing them for all that they will endure, and he tells them to keep awake. But what does Jesus mean by this exactly? Is it a call to some kind of active life of faith? Is it meant to warn them, and maybe even us, about avoiding some kind of eternal punishment? What does it mean to keep awake? Could it be that it's about living expectantly? I think another faithful way to translate Jesus' words to keep awake would be to say, stay expectant. Keep awake, but stay expectant. Live in a way that is expectant. Live in a way that expects God to show up, not only in the birth of the Savior, a baby, but expect God to show up where you're at in life. Jesus is telling his followers to believe in a God who doesn't simply sit up in heaven unmindful of humanity's needs, but to believe, to expect God to always be near to us. So again, today we enter into the season of Advent, a time that we give attentive focus to waiting and watching. But what are we watching and waiting for? For the end of the world? For God to finally judge all people and nations? Now, the people of Judea at that time did actively wait because they expected the end of the world to be coming at any moment. Judeans lived under the oppression of the Roman Empire, and the Israelite people, they had known the heavy, abusive hand of the Babylonians and the Persians. And so they felt that tangible struggle between good and evil all around them. And they believed that because of this oppressive world that they lived in, that the world was about to end. And let me tell you, people still believe this today. When people out in the world find out that I'm a pastor, I can't tell you how many people have professed their own end times beliefs to me in all types of places, even out in the parking lot one time. They often tell me how bad the world is and how the end of the world must be coming soon. And they believe that. For many people, when Jesus says, keep awake, for you do not know when the time will come, this is a stern wake-up call today. It's telling many people that how we live is causing sin and turmoil in the world, and that God will need to come back quickly to fix it and to judge it. But again, I'm not convinced that that's what Jesus means when he says, keep awake. If keep awake can mean for us today to stay expectant, then we also need to think for a moment about what that might mean. We do live in a world, in many ways, like the first century Judeans lived. The world is still full of violence and hatred, persecution, oppression, death. And while we may not feel the sting of violence and oppression every day, we all still have those valleys that we live in, that we experience. And I often use that word valley to describe a season of life that feels low and difficult and strenuous, not as it ought to be. Life gives to us so many unexpected challenges, doesn't it? And these trials and setbacks of life can cause us to ask God, why? And when, God, are you going to show up and do something, anything, to help me? That's the tension of Advent. Waiting on God. Waiting on God to show up for us. So to stay expectant is to believe that God will show up. Expecting that to happen. Believing that that will happen. But even when God does show up, I don't believe that all of our struggles will magically go away. We know that's not life. The Son of God came into a world of suffering, and Jesus, the divine Son of God, he suffered at the hands of that violent world. But expectancy then is seeing the light amidst the dark. Staying expectant is believing in the hope of God abiding with us even in the midst of the valleys and the darkness of life. Now, Pastor Bill mentioned that we do have a new set of Advent pyramids that we will be dedicating and blessing today. These beautiful fabric pieces that we will be blessing today, that we put on display new today. Now, the fabric artist that we commissioned, Kathy Roy, well, she made an intentional choice to include the symbol of light in this pyramid. And I want to think about that a little bit with you all today. In the season of Advent, as many people know, we use dark blue hues, don't we? Mainly dark blue tones to symbolize a time of waiting and preparing. But I love how Kathy also used white shades to symbolize the light that was coming into the world. This is a pyramid simply meant to highlight the liturgical season, Advent. But you know what? This pyramid is how God abides with us. This is Emmanuel, God with us. It's symbolic of God existing, the light existing in the chaos and the heartache of life. This is light mingling, coexisting with darkness, light finding a way to shine and illuminate the love of God to a hurting world. This is God with us in the valleys. It's not simply woven fabric. It is light, the light of God here among us today, in this place, in the world with us today. And so when I say stay expectant, I think of this pyramid. I think of a God who exists in a world of pain and suffering and chaos, while at the same time healing this world and making all things new. And you can't always tell where the blues and the purples end and where the light begins, because it's subtle. It's subtle and it's hard to identify, just like in life. And so I ask, are you willing to look deeper? Are you willing to look for the ways that the light of God might be breaking in to all the dark places in your life? Because the light, as in this pyramid, it is breaking through. It is making itself known and at work among the dark, among the valleys, among all the brokenness of life. The people to whom Jesus spoke in the gospel lived in a world that seemed so wrong, so oppressive, justice, the kind of justice that they wanted and needed, it couldn't be found. And they knew that things in the world were not as they ought to be. And God's people had waited so long for a Messiah, for salvation, for a Messiah to come and help them, for a Messiah to come and help and heal the world. And I have to admit, I don't fully know how to live in that time of waiting. I don't know how God's people lived with a steadfast expectation that God's light would indeed come to them, would indeed come to find them. It's hard to believe when we can't find hope. Would you all admit that with me? It's hard to believe when we can't find hope. And so we too live in what theologians call the already but not yet. A time when God's kingdom is happening all around us and yet has not fully come into its fullness on earth. And yet we stay expectant. We wait as the Israelites did, as the people of Judea did. We wait because we believe that light can exist in the dark. So believe today. Believe in the light. Believe and look for the light. Believe in a God who is with you in the valleys of life that you're in. Believe that God does not abandon you. Believe in a God who is making everything new, even as we wait for it to fully happen. Believe and stay expectant. Amen.